bit back to the this how to explain open source to people. Like in your experience, are there any sort of recurring questions or like the top three concerns that people often have, especially if they are less familiar with open source, like the whole methodology and how the communities work and how they produce the software and how can anyone ever trust that?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's a couple things usually around like the sort of national security questions of like what happens if our adversaries see something. So what happens if I don't know, Iran starts using ZARF? Like this is a U.S. Department of Defense project that is being integrated into U.S. weapon systems. Are we giving a defense technology to potentially to a foreign adversary? So that's a potential interesting question, because a lot of businesses have a similar question about like, if we open source this core technology, couldn't competitors use it too? But at the national scale, it's a little bit different. The way that I usually would answer that though is that yes, we're giving it to everyone, but we're giving it to individual people as well, to the people of say Iran. And if they want to use it to bring, air gap software for their own needs and for their own purposes, they can do that too. And their government is more threatened by that than our government is, and so it kind of like evens out in the end. So yeah.
That's an interesting approach. I hadn't really thought of that when I was curious to see how you would answer that question. That's an interesting approach.
Yep.
It's equally evil to everybody. So
to everybody, yes, yeah. You just have to learn how to deal with it. It's just the way the world is. So that's a common question. And then the other one is like, how do you manage contributors to a project, and how do you know who these people are? And a lot of that is just through the practices that we have on our own projects. We have a core group of maintainers on them, but then for any external PRs, regardless of whatever, we require two maintainers to approve those PRs. And so we make sure that the code getting into the project is solid, and it is backed. And obviously we do our own checks and things. We try to live in many ways what we preach, and so we try to SBOM and CP scan our own software and deliver it securely. And so all that stuff kind of helps to sort of mitigate a lot of that.
So these answers usually resonate with people, or did you have different answers and then they evolved into what they are today as you learned more about what people are mostly skeptical about when it comes to open source?
I think it mostly was like kind of came from a lot of the stuff that had been done before. So I think we already had these answers for the most part for open source. Because when I was at Defense Innovation Unit before, a lot of what they were trying to do was bring commercial technologies into the Department of Defense. They weren't focused on bringing open source technologies, but it was more about how do you invest in a startup that has a dual use technology and give like money to them, investment money to them to bring their technology into the DoD. And similar questions would come up. What happens if, I don't know, a Chinese investment firm invests in this company? And then, do we want to even touch that company? And then trying to have, their work in educating the government about, no, it's fine. We should invest, because if we basically like let that one go, then we're just like letting the technology go, and we're never going to be able to take advantage of it. And we won't be able to have influence over it either. So it's just kind of a moot point. So I think a lot of the discussions that happened during that time kind of flowed into what became Defense Unicorns and some of the way that we're answering some of the open source questions as well.
So at the end of the day, most of the things are not necessarily that different from the usual business, corporate, proprietary world compared to open source. Okay.
Yeah. It's just a different scale, slightly.
Oh, yes.